Hi there, and we are on to Mark chapter 15, the first 15 verses. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things you are accused of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. This is another passage that is maybe a difficult one to find out kind of life application, although again, there's some interesting facts. You've got very early in the morning the chief priests, the elders, teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reaching a decision. Plotting in darkness, maybe. The idea that out of so many voices, there wasn't one that stood up for Jesus. And it's interesting to note because we know that there was Nicodemus. We know that there were others that were in that circle that had really felt drawn towards Jesus. And maybe the pressure was too big. And we know in the bigger picture that this had to happen. Jesus had to be crucified. So maybe there's a reason why it had to happen. But it's interesting to note that all of these groups are mentioned. And together they come up with this decision. And ultimately this decision that they came up with was to kill an innocent man. And so forgetting the fact that we know where it goes and that it's Jesus and that he had to die, whatever, the religious leaders, chief priests, teachers of the law, came to this decision. And I would say we could really get into hot boat if we took this to a different aspect, which is that of the death penalty, that many Christians believe that there's reason to kill people, which I don't. I don't believe you can come up to that conclusion from reading this book, from reading the life and the words and the times of Jesus. The one time Jesus was invited to take part in a stoning, he turned the whole thing on its head. Jesus himself took death so that we didn't have to die. Jesus forgave the thief on the cross who was worthy of death, in a sense. There's no sense that I can get from the life of Jesus that he wanted the death penalty, and yet groups of chief priests, elders, teachers of the law, the whole Sanhedrin, there's groups of them getting together and saying the death penalty is right. This is something we should think about. And if you've thought the death penalty is right because you were taught that from a young age and because it's what you always believed, then I challenge you to look through Scripture, wrestle with it, and see, is this something that is right? Is the best lesson to give to somebody that has killed people, to kill them, to tell them that killing is wrong? Very hot, debatable topic, but I just don't see it. I don't see it. So, again, you have Jesus choosing when he gives his word. So he's not offering. He's not spouting out, he's not babbling, he's waiting for the right time to give words. And then I think the other thing that comes strongly out of this is the fact of the crowd. The crowd were there when Jesus was doing miracles. This isn't a whole brand new crowd. This is the crowd that some of them would have been there when he fed the crowd using a kid's lunch, the feeding of the 5,000 men plus women and children. So presumably 15,000, 20,000 people. Some of those people very likely to be in this crowd. Jesus fed crowds on 2 occasions. Jesus healed people. Jesus raised dead people back to life. And while he was looking good, while things were great, while it was popular, the crowds were cheering him on. The moment it became unpopular, the disciples ran away, a lot of people distancing themselves, but those in the crowd are now cheering for the other side. And we see that in life so often. Cheer for the most popular one, flavor of the month, which is the most popular church to go to, who's the big band, whatever it is. instead of just sticking with things, instead of just fighting for truth. Maybe this comes up in terms of the question of homosexuality, which is hugely debatable, and there's what was popular has shifted to, there's a new popular opinion now. Are you going to follow popular opinion, or are you going to wrestle and come up with the right answer? Death penalty. Popular opinion has shifted. Which side are you going to take? Are you going to wrestle with Scripture, and are you going to find out what you really believe God is saying to us? And so those are just two or three of the things that come out of this passage as we slowly are moving away to the time when Jesus dies. And just let those words hit you. We maybe get so used to them, but the crowd screaming, "Crucify him. Crucify him." And maybe again this is a reflection of Peter when they're all asking him about knowing Jesus, and he says, "I don't know him, I don't even know the man." As we hear the crowd start to say, "Crucify him. Crucify him." Do we hear our voice in that? Do I ever hear my voice in the crowd calling for the death of kingdom things instead of calling for the life of the kingdom? Do I find myself cheering on the things that Jesus was against instead of cheering on and championing the things that Jesus was for? Those are some of the questions we have to ask ourselves. Be led by what is right. Don't be led by the crowd. As Christians, Jesus at one time said, "All men will hate you because of me." As Christians, we swim upstream. We look different to most people. Go read Matthew 7. There's a wide path, there's a narrow path. The Christian people that are following Jesus are typically going to look different from the majority, from the crowd, from those cheering for other things. So if you look around you and everyone else looks the same as you, and they're cheering on the same things you are, and they're doing the same things you are doing, who knows? Maybe it's time to have a rethink. Or maybe you just need to be part of a bigger crowd.